Top athlete dates obese woman as a joke. He later falls in love with her. Jake Matthews was the kind of man who turned heads wherever he went. With his athletic frame, confident stride, and an aura of effortless charm, he was the golden boy of professional sports. Fans adored him, sponsors lined up for his endorsement, and his teammates saw him as the one who could keep morale high, even during the toughest matches. But beneath the surface of his perfectly curated image lay a streak of arrogance that came naturally to someone who had never faced rejection. It was after a grueling training session that Jake found himself lounging in the locker room with his teammates, their laughter echoing off the tiled walls. Conversations ranged from the upcoming championship to weekend plans, but as always, the group's banter soon turned competitive. "All right, Matthews," one of his teammates, Derek, said with a smirk, tossing a towel over his shoulder. "You think you've got game off the field too, huh, Mr. Perfect?" Jake grinned, his ego inflating. "I don't think, man." "I know." "Then how about this?" Derek challenged, leaning in with a mischievous glint in his eye. "We dare you to go on a date with someone completely unexpected. No models, no influencers, none of your usual types. Someone ordinary." Jake raised an eyebrow, unimpressed. "That's it? Where's the challenge?" Derek's smirk widened. "Not just anyone. Someone no one would ever pair with you. We're talking complete opposites here. And let's make it fun. Ask her out, take her on a few dates, and keep it going long enough for her to think it's real." Laughter rippled through the group, and Jake chuckled along. He leaned back, feigning thoughtfulness. "All right, I'll play. But you guys better not cry when I prove, yet again, that I can handle anything." The group hooped and cheered, egging him on, and Jake felt the familiar rush of being the center of attention. For him, this was just another game, another way to show he could rise to any challenge. The following day, Jake found himself at a local coffee shop, a place he rarely frequented. He was there at Derek's insistence, who had claimed it was full of interesting candidates. Jake scanned the room, his sharp eyes taking in the bustling crowd. That's when he saw her. Chloe sat near the window, her sketchbook open, a pencil in hand. Her auburn hair was tied back loosely, and she was immersed in her drawing, oblivious to the world around her. She didn't fit into Jake's usual idea of beauty. She was plus-sized, dressed in a cozy sweater and jeans, with a warm, natural look that set her apart from the polished perfection he was accustomed to. But there was something about her that caught his attention. He hesitated for a moment, his confidence faltering ever so slightly. Then he squared his shoulders and approached her table. "Hey," he said, flashing his signature smile. "Mind if I join you?" Chloe looked up, surprised. Her hazel eyes scanned him briefly before she gestured to the empty seat across from her. "Sure, but fair warning, I'm not great company when I'm drawing." Jake chuckled, settling into the chair. "That's all right. I'm Jake, by the way." "Chloe," she replied, her tone polite but wary. For the next few minutes, Jake tried to spark a conversation, but Chloe remained focused on her sketchbook, responding with brief answers. She wasn't cold, but she wasn't exactly receptive either. Jake found himself working harder than usual to make an impression, a rare experience for him. "So, what are you drawing?" he asked finally, leaning forward slightly. Chloe glanced up, her pencil pausing. "Just something for fun," she said, closing the sketchbook. "I like to draw people I see around me. It's kind of a hobby." "That's cool," Jake said, genuinely intrigued. "Are you an artist?" "Not really," she replied with a small shrug. "I work at a community center. Art's just something I do on the side." Jake nodded, filing away this piece of information. He decided to shift gears. "Listen, Chloe, I don't usually do this, but I was wondering if you'd like to grab dinner sometime." Chloe blinked, caught off guard. "Dinner?" "Yeah," Jake said, maintaining his easy smile. "You seem interesting, and I'd like to get to know you better." Chloe hesitated, her instincts telling her there had to be a catch. Guys like Jake didn't just ask out women like her. But his smile seemed genuine, and for a moment she wondered if maybe, just maybe, this was real. "Okay," she said finally. "Dinner sounds nice." Jake grinned. "Great. How about Friday? Sure, Chloe said, still trying to process what had just happened. As Jake left the coffee shop, a wave of triumph washed over him. The first step of the challenge was complete. But as he replayed the interaction in his mind, he couldn't shake the feeling that Chloe was different from anyone he'd ever met. For the first time, he felt a flicker of doubt. Not about the challenge, but about himself. Friday evening arrived, and Chloe found herself standing in front of her mirror, tugging at the hem of her floral dress. She had spent the better part of the day debating whether to cancel the date. Jake Matthews, a man who seemed plucked from a fitness magazine cover, had asked her out, and she still couldn't figure out why. Maybe he just likes art, she muttered under her breath, smoothing her dress for the 100th time. But even as she said it, doubt gnawed at her. Men like Jake didn't usually see women like her. Still, she pushed the doubts aside, grabbed her bag, and headed out the door. Jake was already waiting at the restaurant when she arrived, leaning casually against the front entrance. His easy confidence was undeniable, but as soon as he spotted Chloe, he straightened and offered a genuine smile. "You look great," he said, opening the door for her. "Thanks," Chloe replied, feeling her cheeks heat. She wasn't used to compliments, especially from men like Jake. The restaurant was upscale but cozy, with soft lighting and an ambience that felt surprisingly intimate. Jake led the conversation, asking about her work at the community center and her passion for art. Chloe found herself relaxing, her initial nerves fading as she talked about the things she loved. "You must be really talented," Jake said as their food arrived. "I mean, I can barely draw stick figures." Chloe laughed, the sound soft and genuine. "It's just practice. Anyone can learn if they try." "Not me," Jake said with a grin. "I'll stick to sports, but I'd love to see some of your work." Chloe hesitated, then said, "Maybe someday." The evening passed in a blur of conversation and laughter. For a moment, Chloe allowed herself to believe that Jake might actually be interested in her, that this wasn't some elaborate joke. But as she walked home, her doubts returned. Men like Jake didn't date women like her, did they? Over the next few weeks, Jake and Chloe went on more dates. Each time, Jake found himself looking forward to their time together more than he expected. What had started as a bet was beginning to feel different. Chloe's warmth and authenticity were unlike anything he'd encountered before. She didn't care about his fame or his athletic achievements. She cared about who he was beneath all that. But Jake's teammates weren't letting him forget the bet. Derek, in particular, was relentless, constantly asking for updates. "So, how's it going with your project?" Derek asked one day after practice, his tone dripping with mockery. Jake scowled. "It's not a project." Derek raised an eyebrow. "Oh, come on, Matthews. Don't tell me you're actually into her." Jake hesitated, the question catching him off guard. Was he? Chloe was funny, smart, and kind in a way that felt rare. She made him feel like more than just an athlete or a public persona. But admitting that meant acknowledging how wrong the bet had been in the first place. "It's complicated," Jake said finally, brushing past Derek. Meanwhile, Chloe was beginning to let her guard down. Jake's consistency and charm were wearing away her skepticism, and she found herself looking forward to their time together. He had a way of making her laugh, of making her feel seen in a way she hadn't experienced before. One evening, as they walked through a park after dinner, Jake stopped suddenly and turned to her. "Chloe, can I ask you something?" he said, his tone unusually serious. "Sure," she replied, a hint of nervousness creeping into her voice. "Why do you think people always judge others based on appearances?" he asked. "Like, why does it matter so much?" Chloe blinked, caught off guard by the question. "I don't know," she said thoughtfully. "I guess it's just easier for some people to label others than to actually get to know them." Jake nodded, her words hitting closer to home than she realized. He was starting to see just how unfair and shallow the bet had been. And he was starting to realize how much he cared about Chloe. Not as a joke, but as someone who had become important to him. As they continued walking, Jake found himself wanting to tell Chloe the truth, to come clean about how this had all started. But fear held him back. He didn't want to lose her, Not when he was finally starting to see the kind of man he wanted to be. One evening, after a particularly wonderful date, Chloe received a message from one of Jake's teammates, someone she'd only met in passing at one of his games. The message was short and cruel, a single line that shattered her world. Bet Jake's having fun with this little joke. Don't take it too seriously, though. Chloe stared at her phone, her heart sinking. She read the message over and over, her chest tightening with disbelief. Was this all a game to him? Had she been nothing more than a bet? The next day, when Jake showed up at her door, Chloe didn't hesitate. Is it true? She demanded, her voice trembling with a mix of anger and hurt. Jake froze, his usual confidence crumbling. What are you talking about? The bet, Chloe said, holding up her phone. Was it true? Did you ask me out as some kind of joke? Jake's face fell, and the guilt in his eyes was answer enough. Chloe, I don't, she said, cutting him off. Just tell me the truth. Jake swallowed hard, his shoulders slumping. Yes, he admitted. It started as a bet, but it's not what you think. I never meant to hurt you. Chloe laughed bitterly, tears welling in her eyes. You never meant to hurt me? Jake, you made me believe this was real, and now I find out it was all just a game. It's not a game anymore, Jake said desperately. I swear. Chloe, I care about you. But Chloe shook her head, stepping back and closing the door in his face. Just go. As the door shut, Jake stood there, his heart pounding. He had never felt so powerless, so ashamed. And for the first time, he realized that if he wanted to win Chloe back, he'd have to do more than just apologize. He'd have to prove to her and to himself that he could be the man she deserved. Jake stood frozen outside Chloe's door, her words echoing in his mind. The weight of his actions hit him like a freight train, crushing any semblance of the carefree arrogance he once carried. He had thought it was just a joke, just another game to win. But now, seeing the pain in Chloe's eyes, he realized how deeply he had miscalculated. The walk back to his car felt endless. He replayed every moment with Chloe in his mind. The way she laughed, the way her eyes lit up when she talked about her art, the way she had trusted him despite her initial hesitations. And now all of it was gone. Not because of her, but because of him. Jake drove aimlessly for hours, unable to return home and face the emptiness of his penthouse. Eventually, he pulled over at a park, sitting alone under the dim glow of a street lamp. The silence around him was deafening. For the first time, he didn't care about what his teammates would think, didn't care about the bet. All he cared about was the fact that he had hurt someone he had grown to care for more than he thought possible. Chloe, on the other hand, spent the night staring at the message on her phone. She felt betrayed, foolish, and angry, mostly at herself for letting her guard down. She thought about how Jake had seemed so genuine, so different from the men who had dismissed her in the past. But now it all felt like a lie, a cruel trick played at her expense. Her sketchbook lay open on the table, the half-finished drawing of Jake staring back at her. She grabbed it and ripped the page out, crumpling it in her hands. Tears spilled over as she sat down, her shoulders shaking with the weight of her emotions. She had let herself believe, even for a moment, that she was worthy of someone like him. But now, she wasn't sure she'd ever be able to trust again. Lucy, Chloe's best friend, came over the next morning after hearing the news. Chloe had sent her a late-night text, a brief message that didn't even begin to convey the depth of her hurt. Chloe, Lucy said softly, sitting beside her on the couch. I'm so sorry. He's an idiot. A complete idiot. Chloe nodded, but her throat was too tight to speak. You're better than this, Lucy continued, her tone firm. You don't need someone like him. Someone who doesn't see how amazing you are. I thought he did, Chloe said finally, her voice breaking. I thought he saw me. Lucy wrapped an arm around her, holding her close. Then he's even more of an idiot for ruining that. Jake didn't go to practice the next day. He ignored Derek's calls and messages, unable to stomach the thought of being around the people who had pushed him into this mess. Instead, he spent the day reflecting on how he had gotten here. The truth was, the bet hadn't forced him to approach Chloe. He could have said no. He could have walked away. But he didn't because deep down he had wanted to prove something to his teammates, to himself. And now, the only thing he had proven was how deeply he had failed. By the afternoon, Jake knew he had to do something. He couldn't let things end this way. He couldn't let Chloe think she was nothing more than a joke. She deserved better, and for once, he was determined to be the person who could give her that. The next few weeks were a turning point for Jake. He started small, showing up at the community center where Chloe worked, not to see her, but to learn about the programs she was so passionate about. He volunteered in the art classes, clumsy at first but earnest in his efforts. The staff and participants were skeptical at first, but Jake's genuine interest eventually won them over. Word of his involvement reached Chloe through her coworkers, though she made a point to avoid crossing paths with him. She didn't want to see him, didn't want to feel the confusing mix of anger and longing that his name stirred in her. But Jake didn't stop. He began advocating for funding to expand the community center's programs, using his influence to bring in donors and sponsors. He stayed late after events, cleaning up and talking with the staff about their needs. For the first time in his life, he wasn't the center of attention. And for the first time, he didn't care. One evening, as Chloe left the community center after a long day, she spotted Jake sitting on the steps. He wasn't dressed in his usual polished way. Instead, he wore jeans and a simple hoodie, his hair slightly tousled. He looked up when he saw her, his expression a mix of hope and apprehension. "Chloe," he said, standing as she approached. "Can I talk to you?" She hesitated, every instinct telling her to walk away. But something in his eyes stopped her. "What do you want, Jake?" "I want to apologize," he said, his voice steady but filled with emotion. "Not just for the bet, but for everything. For not seeing you for who you really are from the start. For being so blind and selfish." Chloe crossed her arms, her expression guarded. "And now you think you can just say sorry and make it all better?" "No," Jake admitted. "I don't think that. I needed to tell you how much you mean to me, how much I've changed because of you." She stared at him, her heart battling with her mind. "Jake, I don't know if I can trust you again." "I understand," he said, his tone earnest. "And I'm not asking for anything right now. I just wanted you to know that I'm trying. And I'm not going to stop." For a moment, they stood in silence, the weight of their history pressing between them. Finally, Chloe sighed, her voice softening. "I need time." Jake nodded, his chest tightening with both hope and uncertainty. "Take all the time you need." As Chloe walked away, Jake watched her go, a quiet determination settling over him. He knew he couldn't undo the past, but he could spend every day proving that he was someone worthy of her trust. Jake returned to his car, feeling the weight of Chloe's words settle over him. She needed time, and he would give her as much as she required. But waiting didn't mean standing still. Jake had spent so much of his life coasting on charm and natural talent, never truly earning anything beyond his athletic accolades. This time, he was determined to do better, not just for Chloe but for himself. The next morning, Jake met with his agent, a no-nonsense woman named Vanessa who had managed his career since the beginning. She was surprised to see him, given that he had been avoiding the spotlight in recent weeks. "Jake," she said, raising an eyebrow as he sat down across from her desk. "This is unexpected. What's going on?" "I need your help," he said, leaning forward. "I want to use my platform to do something meaningful." Vanessa blinked, clearly caught off guard. "Meaningful? Like a charity endorsement?" "No," Jake said firmly. "I don't want to just slap my name on something. I want to be involved. Hands-on." Vanessa studied him, her skepticism softening as she saw the determination in his eyes. "All right, what kind of cause are we talking about?" Jake thought of Chloe and her work at the community center. Art programs, education, places that give people a chance to grow, no matter where they come from. Vanessa nodded slowly. "That's not what I expected, but I can work with it." Over the next few weeks, Jake threw himself into the new initiative. He visited schools and community centers, listening to teachers, parents, and students about what they needed most. He partnered with local organizations to fund art supplies, create scholarships, and host workshops. The media picked up on his efforts, labeling it a surprising but admirable shift for the star athlete. Chloe couldn't avoid hearing about Jake's work. It was all over social media and local news outlets, his face appearing in photos alongside children holding paintbrushes and teachers beaming with gratitude. At first, she dismissed it as another PR stunt. But as the stories piled up, each one highlighting Jake's genuine involvement, she began to wonder if he really had changed. One evening, Lucy burst into Chloe's apartment, waving her phone excitedly. "Have you seen this?" she asked, shoving the screen in Chloe's face. It was a video of Jake speaking at a school assembly. He was dressed casually, his demeanor humble as he addressed the students. "I used to think success was all about winning," Jake said in the video, "about being the best no matter what it took. But I've learned that real success comes from helping others succeed, from lifting people up instead of pushing them down." Chloe stared at the screen, her chest tightening. She wanted to believe him, but the fear of being hurt again held her back. Jake's transformation didn't go unnoticed by his teammates, particularly Derek. At a practice session, Derek approached him, a mocking grin on his face. "So, what's this new act all about?" Derek asked. "Trying to impress your little project again?" Jake straightened, his jaw tightening. "It's not an act. And Chloe's not a project." Derek chuckled. "Come on, man. You really think she's worth all this effort?" Jake's fists clenched at his sides, but he forced himself to stay calm. "Yes," he said firmly, "she is. And if you can't see that, then maybe you're the one who needs to change." The other players nearby exchanged glances, sensing the shift in Jake's tone. Derek shrugged, but his smirk faltered. For the first time, Jake didn't care what his teammates thought. He wasn't doing this for them. A week later, Jake found himself back at the community center, helping set up for an art exhibition showcasing the students' work. He had been working with the center for weeks now, but this event felt different. It was personal. Chloe arrived late, her heart pounding as she entered the crowded room. She hadn't planned on coming, but something inside her had urged her to see the event for herself. The walls were lined with vibrant paintings and drawings, the room filled with laughter and applause as students proudly showed off their work. And there, in the middle of it all, was Jake. He was helping a young boy adjust the height of his easel, his expression focused and kind. He looked so different from the man she had first met, calmer, more grounded. When Jake spotted Chloe across the room, his face lit up. He hesitated for a moment, then made his way over to her. "Chloe," he said, his voice soft. "You came." She nodded, her heart pounding. "I wanted to see what you've been doing." Jake gestured to the room around them. "This is what matters. Helping people find their voices, their confidence. It's because of you that I even realized how important this is." Chloe looked at him, her emotions a whirlwind. "Jake, I'm still not sure if I can trust you." "I know," he said, his tone earnest. "And I'm not asking you to forgive me overnight. I just want you to know that I'm trying. For real." For a moment, they stood in silence, the noise of the exhibition fading into the background. Finally, Chloe spoke. "I can see that you've changed," she said. "But trust takes time, Jake. And I need to take things slow." Jake nodded, relief and hope mingling in his expression. "I'll wait, Chloe, however long it takes." As the evening went on, Chloe found herself watching Jake interact with the students and staff, her guarded heart beginning to soften. She wasn't ready to dive back into their relationship, but for the first time, she felt a flicker of hope. Maybe, just maybe, this could be the start of something real. As the weeks passed, Chloe cautiously allowed Jake back into her life, though she kept him at arm's length. They would meet occasionally at the community center, usually during events or volunteer sessions. Chloe admired the way Jake threw himself into the work, not for the cameras or the applause, but for the people. He was patient with the children, eager to learn from the staff, and genuinely invested in making a difference. One afternoon, as they were cleaning up after an art class, Jake approached her. He was holding a large canvas covered in vibrant streaks of paint, the product of one of the students' enthusiastic experimentation. "Do you ever miss painting for yourself?" he asked, setting the canvas down nearby. Chloe glanced at him, her hands busy stacking brushes. Sometimes, she admitted, I used to paint a lot, but life got in the way. Jake nodded thoughtfully. You should start again. You're really talented. Chloe paused, his words surprising her. It's not that simple. Why not? He asked gently. You've spent so much time helping others find their creativity. Don't you think you deserve to focus on your own, too? Chloe's chest tightened. She wanted to argue, to dismiss his suggestion, but the sincerity in his voice stopped her. For the first time, she wondered if she had been using her work at the community center to avoid confronting her own dreams. I'll think about it, she said quietly. Jake smiled, and for a moment, the space between them felt less like a chasm and more like a bridge. That evening, Chloe sat in her apartment, staring at a blank canvas she had pulled out from the back of her closet. Her paint supplies were dusty, but as she opened them, the familiar scent of acrylics brought back a flood of memories. She hesitated, her brush hovering over the canvas, before finally making the first stroke. It wasn't perfect, but it was a start. Over the next few days, Chloe found herself spending more and more time painting. She stayed up late, losing herself in the colors and shapes, rediscovering a part of herself she had almost forgotten. It was liberating and terrifying all at once, but it also felt right. Jake noticed the change in her. She seemed lighter, more at ease, though she still kept her distance. He didn't push, he knew better than to rush her. Instead, he focused on continuing his work at the community center and proving, little by little, that he was no longer the man who had hurt her. One day, while they were setting up for another exhibition, Chloe approached Jake. She was holding a small painting, her fingers nervously gripping the edges. I want to donate this, she said, her voice steady but soft. Jake looked at the painting, a vibrant, abstract piece full of movement and emotion. It was beautiful, a reflection of everything Chloe had poured into it. Chloe, he said, his voice filled with awe. This is incredible. Are you sure you want to give it away? She nodded. I want it to be part of the auction. Maybe it can help raise money for the center. Jake smiled, his chest swelling with pride. It will. People are going to love it. As the auction began that evening, Chloe stood off to the side, watching as people admired her work. When her painting was announced, there was a flurry of bids, and it sold for far more than she had expected. The applause that followed was deafening, and Chloe felt tears prick her eyes. For the first time in a long time, she felt seen, not for her weight, not for her work, but for her talent. Jake found her after the event, his smile as bright as hers. I told you, he said. You're amazing. Chloe laughed, brushing away a tear. I guess I just needed someone to remind me. They stood there for a moment, the noise of the crowd fading into the background. Jake reached out, hesitating before gently taking her hand. Chloe, he said, his voice soft but firm. I know I've hurt you. I know I've got a long way to go to earn your trust. But I'm not going anywhere. I'm here for you, for as long as it takes. Chloe looked at him, her heart racing. She saw the sincerity in his eyes, the vulnerability he had once hidden behind arrogance. And for the first time, she allowed herself to believe that maybe, just maybe, he was telling the truth. I believe you, she said quietly, but we're taking this slow. Jake nodded, a wave of relief washing over him. Slow is fine. As long as I get to be with you. As they left the event together, the first stars of the evening began to appear in the sky. It wasn't a perfect ending, but it was a new beginning. And for Chloe and Jake, that was enough. Over the next few weeks, Chloe and Jake settled into a tentative rhythm. True to her word, Chloe insisted they take things slow, and Jake respected her boundaries. He didn't push for grand gestures or instant forgiveness. Instead, he focused on being present, on proving himself through his actions. Chloe, meanwhile, found herself torn between hope and caution. Jake was patient and thoughtful, qualities she hadn't associated with him when they first met. He supported her art without hesitation, often encouraging her to submit her work to local galleries or take on new projects. Yet, the memory of his betrayal lingered, a reminder of how easily trust could be broken. One afternoon, Chloe was at the community center when Jake arrived carrying a large box. His casual confidence was replaced with a quieter, more subdued demeanor, a reflection of how much he had changed since their initial encounter. "What's that?" Chloe asked, glancing at the box as he set it on a table. Jake opened the lid, revealing stacks of brand-new art supplies, paints, brushes, canvases, and sketch pads. "I heard the kids were running low," he said simply. "Thought I could help." Chloe's heart softened, though she tried not to let it show. "That's really thoughtful of you." Jake shrugged, a faint smile playing on his lips. "It's the least I could do. This place, and you, have given me more than I can ever repay." Chloe bit her lip, unsure how to respond. She had seen Jake's transformation firsthand, and while her heart wanted to trust him, her mind urged her to remain cautious. "Thank you," she said finally. "The kids are going to love this." Later that evening, as Chloe walked home, her thoughts were consumed by Jake. She replayed their conversations in her mind, the small moments of vulnerability he had shown, and the genuine effort he had put into making amends. It was hard to reconcile this Jake with the man who had once treated her as a joke. When she reached her apartment, she found herself staring at a blank canvas. Painting had become her solace in recent weeks, a way to process her emotions and rediscover herself. She picked up a brush, letting the colors flow freely, her thoughts of Jake bleeding into her work. By the time she finished, the canvas was filled with vibrant, chaotic strokes, raw and unfiltered, yet undeniably beautiful. Chloe stepped back, studying the piece. It felt like a reflection of her emotions. Messy, complicated, but full of potential. Meanwhile, Jake continued his work at the community center, his presence becoming a fixture among the staff and children. He found joy in the small victories, helping a shy child gain confidence, securing funding for new programs, or simply being part of something larger than himself. One evening, as he packed up after a long day, the center's director, Ms. Ramirez, approached him. "You've come a long way, Jake," she said, her tone warm. "When you first showed up, I wasn't sure what to make of you. But now I see how much you care." Jake smiled, though her words stirred a pang of guilt. "I just want to do what I can. This place, it's changed me." Ms. Ramirez nodded, her expression thoughtful. "And Chloe? Does she know how much you've changed?" Jake's smile faltered. "I hope so, but I know I have to earn her trust, and that takes time." Ms. Ramirez placed a reassuring hand on his shoulder. "You're on the right path. Just don't give up." Chloe's cautious hope continued to grow, though she still kept Jake at a distance. She noticed the way he interacted with the kids, how he listened to their stories and encouraged their dreams. It was clear that he had found a new sense of purpose, one that extended far beyond the initial bet. One weekend, Chloe decided to visit the gallery where Jake had suggested she submit her work. She had hesitated at first, unsure if she was ready to put herself out there. But Jake's unwavering belief in her talent had given her the courage to try. The gallery owner, a kind older woman named Margaret, was immediately taken with Chloe's pieces. "These are wonderful," Margaret said, her eyes lighting up. "You have a unique perspective, full of emotion and depth. I'd love to feature your work in an upcoming exhibition." Chloe was stunned. "Really? You think they're good enough?" Margaret smiled warmly. "Absolutely. Art is about connection, and your pieces have that in spades." As Chloe left the gallery, a mix of excitement and disbelief coursed through her. She couldn't wait to tell Jake, though the thought of sharing the news with him made her heart ache. He had been instrumental in pushing her to take this step, yet she was still unsure where they stood. When Chloe told Jake about the gallery's interest, his face lit up with pride. "That's amazing, Chloe," he said, his voice filled with genuine excitement. "I knew you could do it." "Thank you," she said softly, "for believing in me." Jake hesitated, then added, "You're incredible, Chloe. I'm just lucky to know you." His words struck a chord, and for the first time, Chloe felt the walls around her heart begin to crumble. She still wasn't ready to fully trust him, but she couldn't deny the progress he had made, or the feelings she still harbored for him. As they stood together in the fading light, Chloe allowed herself to hope. Maybe, just maybe, this could be the beginning of something real. The evening of Chloe's gallery exhibition arrived, and the air buzzed with excitement. The space was filled with art lovers, local patrons, and friends from the community center, all gathered to celebrate the work of emerging artists. Chloe stood near the entrance, her heart racing as she watched people admire her paintings. She still couldn't believe this moment was real. Jake entered the gallery a little later, pausing briefly at the door to take in the sight. His eyes scanned the room until they landed on Chloe, standing near one of her pieces, engaged in conversation. She looked radiant, her confidence shining through in a way that made his chest tighten with pride. As he approached, Chloe spotted him and offered a tentative smile. "You made it." "Of course," Jake replied, his voice warm. "I wouldn't miss this for the world." He gestured toward her painting, a vivid blend of colors and textures that seemed to pulse with emotion. "This one's my favorite," he said. "It's powerful, just like you." Chloe felt her cheeks warm, but she quickly brushed it off. "Thank you. It means a lot that you're here." As the night went on, Jake stayed in the background, giving Chloe space to enjoy her moment in the spotlight. He chatted with a few guests, many of whom were eager to discuss his involvement at the community center. But his focus never strayed far from Chloe, who moved through the crowd with a grace he hadn't seen when they first met. When the event began to wind down, Chloe found Jake sitting on a bench near the gallery's back patio. He was staring at the stars, his expression contemplative. "Hey," she said, taking a seat beside him. "You've been quiet tonight." Jake chuckled softly. "I just wanted to let you have your moment. You deserve it." Chloe studied him, her heart aching at the vulnerability in his voice. For so long, she had guarded herself against him, afraid to believe he could truly change. But now, sitting beside him, she felt something shift. "You know," she began, her voice steady, "when I first found out about the bet, I thought I'd never be able to forgive you. It hurt more than I can explain." Jake turned to her, his expression filled with remorse. "Chloe, But," she interrupted, holding up a hand, "I've seen how much you've grown. You've shown me, through your actions, that you're not the same person you were back then." Jake's breath caught, hope flickering in his chest. "Does that mean?" "It means I'm willing to give us a real chance," Chloe said, her voice soft but firm. "But it's not going to be easy. Trust takes time." Jake nodded, his heart pounding. "I'll wait as long as it takes. I just want to be with you." Chloe smiled, the weight of her doubts finally lifting. "Then let's take this one step at a time." As they sat together under the stars, Jake reached for her hand, holding it gently. It wasn't a grand gesture, but it didn't need to be. For the first time, their connection felt real, untainted by pretense or past mistakes. The gallery lights dimmed as the last of the guests departed, leaving Chloe and Jake in quiet companionship. Their journey had been messy and complicated, but it had also been transformative. They had found something worth holding on to, not just love, but a mutual respect that would carry them forward. And for Chloe and Jake, that was enough. It was a beginning, not an ending, a chance to write their own story one step at a time, together.